Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Crusader Coaching Podcast. My name is Mauro and
I'm Shiv Taylor.
And we're so excited to have you here today. We are going over the second part of the Superpower of Communication podcast. So last time we talked about quite a few different things. We talked about a few examples in our own lives about how communication was important, maybe some of the mistakes that we made, some of the things that we learned. And then we talked about a very important acronym, which we called CAB. And CAB was all about three different things. You know, when you take a taxi cab, you want to make sure you have good communication with your driver. That way you make sure you get to the correct destination. So the first letter in CAB, C, was all about creating clarity. This is super important when you have communication. You want to make sure you have good clarity with people who are listening to you and the people who you are listening to as well. The A was about avoiding assumptions. So when you have communication with people, make sure that you're clear, but you also don't make an assumption about what the other person is saying. Ask them to clarify it for you. And sometimes it's good to ask the other person to repeat back what they said to you. And then the B in CAB is all about blocking out time. Now, this is important because you never want communication to feel like it's super rushed. If communication is very rushed, what ends up happening is you actually never really get to the main issue. Because when you feel rushed, you're like, did we really understand each other? I was stressed out. He was stressed out. She was stressed out. And it was kind of like, you never really feel like you're actually getting listened to. So blocking out time to be present and listen is super important for communication. And that's kind of like the main idea what we went over in the first podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have another acronym today that we're going to get into a little later for all the CAB fans. But I guess the first thing we really wanted to get into for part two was the different forms of communications.
Yeah.
The different levels, I suppose. That's the way kind of I would put it. And, you know, we're talking low quality and high quality as the main two. And, of course, you know, we also figured out, I guess there's like a middle ground as well with like a medium kind of quality of communication. Because of technology really has really formed that, you know?
Yeah. There's kind of like, I guess you could say a medium difficulty, if we're going to talk about level, like a medium difficulty of communication. But so a lot of times in today's world, we live in a world now where everything is about fast-paced communication. We live in a world now of social media. And social media really revolutionized the way that we communicate. And a lot of that communication, believe it or not, is actually low quality. And that's what we're going to talk about first is, well, what is low quality communication? So low quality communication is typically text-based communication. So it's either email, it's text messages, it's IMs, it's all the messages that you can kind of see in a text-based format. And why is it low quality, Shiv? Like, why do you think those types of communication are low quality?
So it's low quality when you want to, I guess, communicate larger ideas or larger plans of some sort. So what we would only use this text-based low quality communication for simple things like just deadlines or say, hey, I'll see you at 2, or you already had the high quality communication kind of thing. Low quality communication to me is just to reinforce a bigger conversation that was kind of already had. So to say the reason it's called low quality is because it's low quality for the overall idea. Of course, if we already had a bigger talk and I text you saying, hey, 3 o'clock sound good? I mean, in that terms, it worked perfectly, but you have to understand when to use that form of texting. You know, we wouldn't try to put together a giant event through text. You know, we would rather do that through medium or even ideally high quality communication.
Yeah.
And I guess with the way technology, that's why we have the medium level. So it'd be the low level would be text-based and the middle level would be phone calls. Still, we're not seeing each other. We hear the voice, which is obviously still an upgrade, but you know, it's still not the highest quality. You know, and you know, we could get into some of the stuff you would use that one for. I mean, to me, it's more of like, I guess, kind of a hybrid ground. I would use it for the confirmations, but still, I don't think the biggest plans are going to be made on a phone call.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you would agree with that too, you know, if
I
you want to
would.
get high quality communication, which
And
is what we're doing now.
yeah, because you really did hit the nail on the head with that, because, and I think the other reason why it's important to talk about what makes it low quality versus high quality is when I send a text message, when I send an email, when I have a conversation with someone through a Facebook post, I can't see the other person, which means I can't read body language. I can't hear their tone of voice. I can't see their facial expressions. I really have little to no idea how this person is presenting themselves. And the ambiguous side of it is, think about all the times you may have had a conversation with someone through text, and you've got people who use smiley faces, exclamation points. Some people are very quote unquote dry when they text, where there's no emotion. But then you have people who that's just how they are through text. And it doesn't mean that they're upset. That's just how they communicate. But sometimes I have had conversations with people like, wait, like, are you upset at me? And I'm like, no, not at all. I'm just sending a text message. It's like, oh, because XYZ, because there's not a million smiley faces and emojis.
Yeah.
You know, showing me your joy of texting me.
There's actually this like old Key and Peele video, if you remember, that's like a comedy duo, and they have this video of a text message miscommunication, essentially, where one guy he texts his friend saying, "Hey man, are we hanging out today?" And he gets a message and he goes, "Sure, dude, whenever you want." Like, that's how he said it to himself when he texted him, "Sure, dude, whenever you want."
Yeah.
And his friend picked it and goes, "Sure, dude, whenever you want. Do you not care?" Like, so they, you know, that's why the miscommunications can happen a lot. I don't know how many times I've stopped texting someone and decided to call them because, you know, something wasn't getting across.
Yeah. And it's funny you brought up that skit, because I actually saw it a few weeks ago. It was actually, they were two brothers, and one brother was like a super like chill guy playing video games. The other guy was like this like super fit, like tall dude, you know. It was, you know, and then they kind of pick the roles that suit their style better, right? And so it was really funny seeing that, because you've got this super chill guy just chilling there, and then the other guy's like kind of like more high strung, kind of like a lawyer type. And he's like, well, that doesn't sound very, you know, exciting of you, dude. Like, it was a really funny skit. But that's so true, though. Even though it's a joke, it's a skit. It's a skit based off of things that happen every single freaking day. They happen on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why it's low quality. So that's why it's low quality. And the other thing, what I wanted to talk about, other than using low quality communication for confirmations and timelines and deadlines, sometimes you also have to understand that it's also good for just communicating like really quick emergencies. Like, hey, my mom's in the hospital. Like, I can't call, I gotta go. So it's like sometimes low quality communication is really good for those emergency type situations. It's like, hey, look, 911, like I have an emergency.
And that's why you can text 911 now, you know, I mean, and that's why it's called, what I was trying to say earlier, it's only called low quality because it's low quality for big idea, you know, big communication. But, you know, if we were talking to just getting a simple message across, I suppose text messaging would be considered high quality, but that's not really, you know, what we're measuring it on, I suppose.
Yeah. We're measuring it on the fact of how can we really understand the complete spectrum of the message that's being delivered. Because quality is about that, because if I have a phone call with you, now we're moving into medium quality. With that phone call, now I've got access to your tone. I've got access to your volume. I've got access to those two very important things, because with tone and volume, I have an extra medium of expression. Now you're not just getting the black and white data of the words that I'm using. Now you're also getting more of the other form. You're hearing my tone. You're hearing how loud I'm speaking. You're hearing how soft I'm speaking.
Yeah.
So, and I can explain that a little bit better to you than I would over text.
Yeah, and also you could talk through your if you say you're confused about something, or both of you guys are confused, I mean, you could definitely talk through your confusion better than texting through it, because oftentimes when you're in a texting like that, sometimes you both texting each other at the same time, and stuff you're currently writing has already been answered, so and the overlap comes because we're not technically talking at the same time where we could cut each other off or something, so it kind of like, it forces listening when you're on the phone. It forces you to listen a little more instead of just doing your thing and then reading, So definitely, that's the thing when you jump up to medium. But of course, medium is not the highest. And the highest form of communication is essentially this, face-to-face, whether it's online or in person. Kind of the same for the sense of talking, For pure communication, we could bundle in person and online kind of thing, Obviously, if this was like working out or something, we'd bump down FaceTime one notch. But
yeah,
this is the kind of communication we say that you do for big ideas, agreements. If you have a project you're starting, stuff like that. I guess most people would probably agree with that. It's probably the least probably the most self-explanatory one would be this one. Would you say, Mauro?
And it's also very good for having those really high value conversations where you talk about, like you said already a couple of times, the big idea projects. Those are super key. The other side is when you have, let's say you're having like a really big, it's something of grand importance, whether if it's something negative or something positive. It's very good to have those big conversations in person if possible, and if not, over video. If I'm having an issue with a client, or if I'm having an issue with a family member, or if there's a business matter that's involved, I really want to clarify that misunderstanding or the miscommunication. I'd rather clarify that as much as possible in person, or if in-person option is not available, especially now because we have a pandemic, maybe it might not be wise to get together with certain people at this time. So then we can kind of default to Zoom.
Yeah.
And it brings more of the human element into it. So obviously we are social creatures by nature, and we were designed to have those interactions. And those interactions, up until probably the last 100, 150 years, have been in person or with a letter. Those were the only two forms of communication. There was no such thing as text messages. Letters were the original text message.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine back in the day how many things must have happened. Like, what if your letter never got there because your post was delayed or killed? Yeah. Like stuff like that used to happen. So we were designed mainly to have these communications in person. And so that's the reason why it's highest quality, because I can really get the full spectrum and I can really understand you better, and the human element is much more present. And that's what makes it the highest quality communication.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure a lot of people probably think like, oh, I'm not in a business, or I don't have projects. And a project could be anything. It could be planning a surprise party, anything really, planning a vacation, something that requires, a moment to sit down and, pretty much level everything out. And I think a lot of people probably know this, but I guess with how much texting, is the norm. I mean, that's kind of the main way we communicate, just for base communication, I think a lot of people started using text message the way it was intended. Hey, see you in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
See you then. And I guess over time we got so comfortable with it, people started using text message as the main way of communication, which, probably isn't the best way. which we've kind of been laying out. So I know most people know that talking on the phone is better than texting, but I guess it's more of a reminder, I guess, because I just feel like a lot of people have kind of really defaulted as text message being their basic way of communication. There's been many.
Over time,
Mhm.
I've noticed the amount of texts that I used to send. Like, for example, when I was 12 or 13, I could see like, wow, like I really didn't have that much text communication. That was when I had just gotten my first cell phone. And I remember like, back then you actually had to pay per text. And there was like, I remember I would look at my phone and it was like, oh my gosh, like I gotta make sure I put as many characters in this text as possible. Or I gotta make sure that I maximize every single message.
Yeah.
So that way it doesn't go over
Yeah.
like 5 or 10. Now
Yeah.
it's like I'll send hundreds of
Yeah.
text messages in a day. It's changed so much. It's really become so much more commonplace
Mhm.
for most things on the day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
WhatsApp chats. I mean,
Yeah.
posting on Facebook, like there's so much like communication volume in low quality, and then you wonder why people get into fights all the time. It's because of that. It's because most of the time people are in low quality communication. And like we said, it has its place, but you really got to be wise when you use communication. Then the other side of it is, well, we had this 1.5 hour meeting when in reality, this could have been solved with an email. I hear that all the time from clients I've had that they've worked in corporate positions or they've worked for company, and they're like, you know what, like this 1 hour meeting really didn't have to happen. Like we could have just sent out a couple memos. So it goes both ways because you want to value people's
Yeah.
time
You
and you
can
want to
use high
respect their
quality
space.
communication wrong as well.
Yeah. So there's the time and place for each thing. You have to be really clear on when each volume, when either volume is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And that all boils down to prudence and getting clear on making sure, as we listed out before, when is it good for either one.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing, is just being prudent and understanding when to distinguish which form. Now that we've kind of comprehensively distinguished between the 3 different forms of communication and when they're applicable, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, well, how can we improve our communication? How can we give some good quality tips? And today I came up with a second acronym on 3 very good tips how you can improve your communication. And the acronym is actually called WHAM. So WHAM, it's easy. Wham, bam,
Mm-hmm.
wham, bam, sham. So last time we had the cab driver, today we have WHAM. I don't know why WHAM, but it sounds good to me, which is why I picked it. So the W in WHAM stands for watching. Now this is for watching predominantly body language. So a lot of times when you are with someone, you can really see if you are in sync with the other person. So for example, if you notice someone's body language is vastly different than yours, and this also bleeds in a little bit to the A in WHAM, which is adjusting, is if you want to build rapport with someone, if you really want to have a connection, you want to match their body language, and you also want to match the tone at which they're speaking. You want to adjust to that. So you want to make sure that if someone is talking slower and they're sitting in a particular way, one of the coaching skills that they taught us in my coaching program was actually called mirroring and matching. So you want to match the other person, you want to match their tone, and you want to match how they're sitting. That way they feel, and they won't notice this, but subconsciously they'll feel more connected to you because they'll start to notice that you and the other person are on the same wavelength.
Yeah, just to establish, I guess, better communication or easier communication. We could get into the next one, which is kind of similar, but it's the A, which is adjusting, typically the pace. And something about that I would say is like, if you know a lot about a subject, for example, and the person you're talking to may be a novice, it's times like that where maybe you would have to explain it in terms that a normal person would understand, instead of just, using all your jargon and fancy words, stuff like that. And that's what I mean by pace. Pace doesn't just mean the speed at which you're talking. I see it also as in, you have in the content, the filter that you have on whether or not they know about a certain subject. Because there's been many times where I've talked to people and they're just using a bunch of terms and stuff that I don't know, and it's very easy to lose someone that way.
Yeah. And if you'll notice, for example, in relationships, over time, the two people naturally will adjust to one another. So I've noticed that, for example, with my sister and her fiance, they are almost mirror images of each other in how they speak or how they sit or the things that they say, because they've been together for a good amount of time. And that old saying is they kind of rub off on each other. So they kind of create this like semi-hybrid, but now it's like they're both the same hybrid. And that was naturally created over a period of time. Well, the good news is that you can build rapport, you can create that artificially and instantly. And people will be like, wow, like, I really feel like you understand me. I really feel like you get me. There's people that they meet someone like, wow, like, he really gets me, or I really naturally like that person. A lot of it is because there are natural ways where people can connect, but you can also be intentional about building rapport by adjusting how you speak to them, speaking in a way that they can understand you, particularly if they're in a specific field. If you know about that language, use that language. And if not, then match their language. And if you can adjust to that, and you can also copy their body language, well, now you've got a powerful 1-2 combo where now you've mastered tone, you've mastered pace, you've mastered language, and now you've even mastered body language. And that is super awesome and key for really being an effective communicator.
Absolutely. And I guess the final one, the M of RAM, would just to be simple, maintain eye contact.
Maintain eye contact. I can't tell you how often I see other people and they're constantly looking down. And it's more than just kind of showing a weakness, because if you can't look someone in the eye, a lot of times people will think, well, that guy's got shame or like that. Not always, but what it does convey is you're not really in sync with me, because you're not giving me that eye contact. You're not giving me that signal that you and I really are paying attention to one another. So if I'm not looking at you, and I see this all the time when people are on their phones, like people will tell me that, yeah, Mauro, I'm listening. No, you're not. If you're on your phone and you're looking down and you're doing something else, you're really not listening. You're hearing me, but you're not necessarily listening, because you can't see me and you can't really kind of understand me 100% high quality if you can't see what I'm doing and you can't see my facial expressions.
There's definitely a difference between listening and hearing. You're always going to hear it. You can't turn hearing up, but listening is something you kind of have to.
What was that?
You did it. You just proved me wrong. Come on. You're making me. I don't have to delete that now. Just
we got to keep that out of the podcast.
Put in the deleted scenes. I can't seem incorrect. It's part of the contract.
Yes. And all these tips and more really are tip of the iceberg type things, but they're so easy to implement, and we'd love to hear from you as to how these tips improve your life. So my call to action for you is to practice WHAM in your next conversation with someone. Even do it as an experiment and ask the other person, did you really feel more listened to in this conversation than you would have in a regular context conversation? If I hadn't, used these three things, if I hadn't used wham, if I hadn't paid attention to you, watched your body language, if I hadn't adjusted myself to you, if I hadn't maintained eye contact with you in the conversation, like, would you think you would have felt more or less listened to? Like, do it as an experiment. I've actually done this in the past. I used to do it a lot more when I first started out in coaching. And people were like, wow, like, what a difference. And people kind of take it for granted. But when you kind of really, like, highlight it, people were like, wow, like, this is a big difference. Like, I really did feel like this conversation was much more constructive. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times even shorter and faster than what it would have been had we not applied those three principles. And these things, building rapport, establishing better communication for personal and professional relationships, we're actually going to dive into a lot more in the workshop that we're doing on August 18th, which is actually going to debut on YouTube. So we're actually going to do a full workshop for the superpower of communication. And in there, we're going to go over much more content and how you can really revolutionize your personal and your professional life, whether if you have a business or not, how you can be a better communicator, because as they say, leaders have to communicate. And if you're not communicating in your life, then you really aren't using the full scope of leadership. So imagine a relationship with no communication. A lot of people are living right now at 20% of their communication capacity. So they have a whole 80% that they can improve on. And a lot of times people will think, well, I'm in the tech industry. I don't really have to communicate. I'm not really talking to the client side. It's like, well, that's not true, because you still got bosses, you've got coworkers, and in your personal life, you have a whole ton of other people. So communication is super important for you no matter what you do. So I hope you can attend that workshop. It's going to be as a gift from us to you, 7:30 p.m. It's going to debut on YouTube on August 18th. We're going to do a full workshop on communication. What do you think about that?
I think it sounds great to me. I was just, getting my calendar ready. But yeah, I guess one last thing that I just want to double down on is essentially, what we're saying is not specifically just meant for work or business. I mean, personal life, everything. I mean, you could use these tactics. It's not always about important things, because to some people just work and business is important, I suppose. But, even silly things like literally a surprise party, that requires even, the highest form of communication.
I can tell you, this happened a couple times, not to me, but to other people whom I've known, and they've done surprise parties where there was one time I remember where a person misunderstood the time and they showed up late, and the surprise had already happened. They're like, oh my gosh, like, I missed the surprise. And that stinks, because she really wanted to be there, but there was a miscommunication with the time, and she actually ended up getting there, and the surprise had already happened. So fortunately, the surprise wasn't crashed, but she missed the opportunity to be a part of that. So that's a very simple but real example, and those things happen all the time. People really misunderstand things, and it could have been clarified like that. It's just a simple time. That could have been another text message or confirmation. Just confirm. That's another communication skill, is confirm. Confirm. I can't say it enough. Confirm. Confirm. Always double down, like you said. Always double down on making sure that you are clear. That's why clarity is important from CAB.
Yep. But I guess, we'll get more into detail during the talk. We'll see you guys online.
Absolutely.
We'll be taking questions as usual. And our DMs are always open in case anyone wants to, suggest anything for what we could talk about next time.
Yeah, I'd really love to get some feedback. If there's anything that you've tried or that you'd like to see improved, we'd love to have your questions live on air here and love to answer them and really kind of help you improve your communication with something, maybe even something more specific to what you have. And then we can maintain that anonymous. It's up to you. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your feedback and your questions. You can always reach out to us on Instagram or Facebook. Check out our YouTube channel. We are on a mission to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So we'd love to have your subscription. If you thought this content was valuable and if you could share it, that'd be great on whatever platform or media that you've seen this on. On that note, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you at the workshop in just a couple of weeks, and looking forward to having you be present on our other video content. Until next time, everyone, stay strong, communicate well, and we'll see you then.
See you then.